Do some squats, face. Yeah, those are sleepers. Did you with your girlfriend? You don't work out a little bit?
Yeah, I know.
You know?
First ever large scale.
Hey everyone, it's nice to be here with you all. I'm going to go ahead, we're just one past the hour, but I'm going to go ahead and get started for the sake of everybody's time and knowing that that's the most valuable thing that we all have. I'm starting by taking attendance, and there's still a few of you who haven't had the opportunity to write your, oh, it looks like everybody changed it. Okay, thank you for that, changing your name. So let me just make sure that I have everybody here. So I have Dylan, I have Bill, I have Brody, I have Cade, I have Cam, I have Drew, I have Michael, and I have Travis. Okay, awesome. So what I want to do is I want to start by doing a check-in, and thank you to everyone who's been sending me their homework assignments. Some of you sent me them yesterday and today, and I'm just getting through all of my emails. I'll get that back to you actually probably this evening, if not first thing tomorrow morning. Does anybody have any, so up till now you should have watched all of week 1, week 2, and week 3. Does anybody have any questions about any of the content that was covered this week? And you can unmute yourself to ask questions, or you can use the chat bar if you want to ask over there.
Hey, yeah, Bryn, actually, I had a question for you.
Yeah, what's up, Bill?
So, I saw that one of the videos was about like creating, I guess, like rules and boundaries for your class.
Mhm.
So I figure that you do know that we have to, like, part of our unit for yoga is to teach like one lesson. Is that something
Right.
that, you know, even though we're not reoccurring teachers for these students, is that still something that we should take time to do in our lesson, is go over kind of
Yeah.
the boundaries? Or I was just kind of curious what
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think it depends where you're at. If you're at the Learning Center, I'm sure Dr. Felix will talk about this because they're familiar with the yoga since he's taught to them, and I'm not so sure that you would. This is what I say standardly. I do a lot of drop-ins into classrooms around the nation just when I'm doing consulting stuff. And so typically what I do at a high level when I walk into the classroom, whether I'm teaching them on the mat or in the chair, is I just say to them, like, hey, listen, you're not my normal classroom, but I'm sure in your classroom that you have different boundaries or rules that you all adhere by. So I'd like to honor those while we're here. And also for myself, it's really important that we all are safe here in the classroom. And so being safe means that you stay on your own yoga mat unless I ask you to get off. It means that you keep your voices inside unless I ask a question. And it means that we're kind to everybody here. And most importantly, like, I want to have fun, but certainly to have fun, we need to make sure that we're all safe. Can everybody agree to those 3 agreements? And I'll say, like, put your thumb up, and they'll give me a thumbs up. And sometimes I'll even say, so repeat back to me what the agreements are, and they'll repeat back. It's, you know, to stay on our own yoga mats. It's to keep our voices inside and to be kind to everybody.
For sure. That's awesome. Thank you.
Does that help you? Yeah. And then it's just really quick, but I mean, I always like it no matter what, because the first thing kids want to do is typically test their boundaries. And especially if you're a sub or a new person in the room. And so I feel like that's great for kids, middle school, high schoolers, because it just sets that, like, hey, I'm here, and I'm requiring a certain level of respect from all of you. And that's ultimately, they want to know where those edges of the pool are, right?
Right, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, great. So what I want to do is a quick review of the week. So this week we talked about the yoga environment. We talked about cleanliness of space. We talked about mat usage. We talked about clothing usage, assistance, and adjustments. So really quickly, I just want to walk through that, which is that just all of you are going to probably be teaching in some sort of public teaching environment, whether that's a public school, a private school, a school that's an urban school versus a rural. And so definitely depending on the classroom or where you are is going to depend on the condition of the classroom. I've taught in some pretty undesirable teaching locations, and it's just important to clear the space and have things clear. The least amount of distractions that you can have, the more engaged your students are going to be. But I guess my point of bringing this up is that ultimately, like, you can do this anywhere. It's just a matter of you having to be flexible and accommodating to the space that you have. Yoga mats comes up a lot. People ask me, do I need to have yoga mats? I've gotten to a point where I say yes, and that's largely, honestly, for a classroom management thing, that having a yoga mat means that somebody's going to stay in their own space and not be in other people's space. And that's an issue, frankly, whether you're teaching to kindergartners. I see middle school adolescent boys that like to, you know, go onto each other's mats and touch each other. So I think it's just a part of the development of children. And so having the mats allows you to keep people in their own space, which ultimately goes back to that safety thing. Now, when we think about yoga mats, you may not have to think about it in traditional yoga mats. So like Dr. Felix was lucky enough that he got a grant through the university, and the Learning Center has yoga mats. I'm not sure if you'll be able to take those yoga mats to other schools if you wind up teaching outside of the center. But something that you can think about for yoga mats is you can ask local yoga studios to donate. They're pretty generous about like lightly used mats, giving them to school programs. Also too, you might just have it in your budget once you become a PE teacher to it is considered equipment. So that can be great. Something else to think about too is like I myself have used beach towels. Like, so if you're in a carpeted space, you could use a beach towel. I've done on the floor where I worked with a school that had zero equipment budget. I put masking tape on the floor. So like I taped out yoga mats and was like, this is your own space that you're in. So just thinking about being creative, but definitely having space for people is really helpful. Clothing is a big thing. If you watched the thing, I talk about clothing not only for your students, but also for you. So all of you are of a different generation than I am. When I grew up, we didn't have things like Lululemon, and it wasn't stylish to wear like tight leggings to school just in general. So those sorts of things are showing up in yoga classes. Which can be fine, but you just, as students get older, they become really aware of their surroundings, as we all know. So when I work with schools, especially with adolescent populations, I ask for them to wear like gym clothes. So like more like cotton shorts and a t-shirt. Something you want to think about is like when you have kids go up, especially adolescents, go upside down, you want to make sure that their shirts are tucked in. So right away in the start of class saying like, everyone tuck in your shirt. So just things to think about with clothing. Also to think about your own clothing. What are you wearing? Because as much as your students are checking one another out, they're also checking you out. So innocently, you might have something on that you realize isn't the greatest thing for yoga. So making sure that you have appropriate clothing as much as you require your students to have appropriate clothing. Assistance comes up. So like, can I have somebody help a class? And like, certainly you can have people help you assist in the class. I think the most important thing for assistance, and like you might do this with each other in your practice teaching, is say Travis says, hey, Cade, do you want to be my assistant? Then Travis needs to brief Cade, like, this is my lesson plan that I'm doing. And if you know your students, you would want to be like, oh yeah, and Layla in the back, you know, she's talkative, and John, he doesn't like to do anything. So just like giving them cues about students in the classroom can be helpful, and also being clear on what you want them to do. So like, oh, I just want you to help if there's a behavior issue is really important. And also, of course, introducing assistance to your students is important. And then the last thing that comes up is adjustments. This can be a really sensitive topic. So whether you're in a school that has a touch or a non-touch policy, I'm always say like a verbal adjustment is much better than a physical adjustment, because it actually allows somebody to get sorted in their own body versus being put into their body. But if there is touch isn't an issue in the school, the only time that you should really be touching students in yoga poses, as I say, like putting out the fire poses. So this would look like, you know, you have a kindergartner who puts their head on the ground when they're doing triangle pose. You might need to help them lift their head off of the ground, because obviously your head doesn't go on the ground in triangle pose. So those sorts of things with touch would be appropriate, but honestly using your language and your cueing as much as often to adjust your students. Does anybody have any questions about the yoga environment that I just talked about in terms of space, mats, clothing, assistance, and adjustments? Okay. Hold on, I'm just taking an attendance tally because I noticed there's more people here. Great, so the next thing that we talked about was positive classroom management. So we talked about 4 different things in classroom management. I think the first most important thing to address is engagement versus disengagement. It's really important for you to know, even as an adult learner, that it's normal for you to have moments of being engaged and moments of being disengaged. And your students will go through natural cycles of this. And it's important to remember that just because a student isn't engaged 100% the whole time doesn't mean that they're not learning. I always, and I think I used this example in the videos and the online training, but I used to teach a class to a group of kindergarten students, and I had this one little girl who would show up every single week. I promise you, she would either lie on her back, twirl her hair, and look up towards the ceiling, or like stare off into space. Probably after about 3 months of working at the school, I was in the local grocery store, and I ran into her in the cereal aisle, and she was with her mom, and her mom said, "Oh, you're the yoga teacher. She loves yoga. She comes home and she's always sharing everything that she learns." And that was a huge moment in my really early teaching of really understanding the conversation around engagement, disengagement, and recognizing there's all different sorts of learners. And just because she wasn't participating didn't mean that she wasn't learning and observing. So something really important to take note of when working with your students. The next thing that I talk about is dynamic teaching. And when I talk about dynamic teaching, I think of it as like wearing a diamond ring that's quite blingy and faceted. And it's important to remember that probably when you start off, for most people, maybe when they start off getting a wedding ring, it's kind of a simple ring, and then over the years, it gets upgraded. I like to think about that in terms of teaching, that over time you upgrade and you get more dynamic and faceted. But thinking about the different ways of dynamic teaching is really important, because the more dynamic your teaching is, the more engaged your students are going to be. And so an example of dynamic teaching would be that you're able to mirror your students. So when you say raise your right hand in the air, you actually raise your left hand in the air, versus saying raise your right hand and raising your right hand and it's the opposite side. Using your yoga mat. So when you're standing in mountain pose using the length part of your mat, when you turn to open up into star, you would face the side of your mat rather than step off of your mat. A common tendency when you first start to teach is that you're on the yoga mat the whole time teaching, but being able to get up and get off of your yoga mat and walk around the room and weave in and out of your students gives a cadence of you commanding the classroom, you also letting them know that you're around. It helps with behavior management. Another thing I talk about in dynamic teaching is like thinking of like the metronome, keeping your pace. So really smooth transitions, moving from one yoga pose to the next, moving from your yoga poses seamlessly into your partner pose, seamlessly into your relaxation. Look it over when you look at dynamic teaching. I always think it's helpful before you do a practice teach to remind yourself of those different things, aspects of it. Like I said, you're not going to necessarily nail each one of them in the beginning. Over time it will happen, but this is something that myself as Dr. Felix will look at when we're looking at your teaching quality of like how well do you command a classroom and how dynamic is your teaching. Then I talked about classroom boundaries. Really important that you establish boundaries on the first day of class. So I always like to explain this like the swimming pool. If I take all of you and chuck you in the middle of the pool, you probably want to swim to the edges and know where the edges are rather than just sit there and flail in the middle. When you flail in the middle, you sink, you swim, behavior kind of gets outrageous. So the same thing with your students is that when you establish, you want to tell them where their boundaries are. If they cross the boundaries, you know, what the implications are to that. Typically, if you don't, they're going to press and push, and it's going to be really difficult for you to, frankly, to teach yoga because of the disruptive behavior. So one of the ways, and there's many ways to do behaviors, and all of you are education students, so I'm sure you've learned a lot of techniques, but one of the really basic things that I love to do is that umbrella of respect that I showed in the video. I don't like it to be that. I find that it's more helpful with students when they feel like they're a part of the process of making behavior management decisions, especially for themselves. Also, when you walk through the activity, then they become really well aware of it. They can't say, I didn't know, and they know what consequences are, so they're less likely to go against your behavior management because they know they're really clear on the consequences. So the process of it is that I talk about, I want everyone to feel safe and respected. And so what are those things that you need to do, and giving them a voice and having them share. And then saying, okay, well, if we don't do this, then what are the consequences? And so, this is going to be unique to the school you work with, the behavior management style of the school, but maybe it's the first time you just bring awareness to their behavior. The second time they have to do like a time in where they go and check in and reflect on why they were behaving the way they were, and they can't join back until they've corrected their behavior. And that's really good because you're teaching self-regulation there. And then lastly, if you have to ask a third time after a time in, then maybe it's that they, get a note home, or you have to have a parent meeting, or so on and so forth. But definitely making classroom boundaries at the beginning is really important. One of the ways that I like to assess behavior is through the ABC method. You may have heard of this before. So it's the antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And so it's really common as adults that we get really caught up in student or child behavior and give the behavior a consequence, but we really don't look into why the behavior is happening. And if we actually pause and take the time to look at why a behavior is happening, then often we can correct it so that the behavior doesn't happen and you never have to get to the consequence. And I think I gave several examples in the meetup, but I'm just going to share a personal example because I was reminded of this yesterday, which is that I have two young boys at home. I have a 7-year-old and I have a 1.5-year-old. And my husband came home yesterday, and my 7-year-old was talking to me about something for school, and my husband came in and started talking to me, and so my 7-year-old got cut off. And so he proceeded to turn around and open up his packet of all of his pencils and stuff. We were working on homework, and he just dumped it all over the floor. And I was like appalled by his behavior and got really upset and asked him, why he was doing that, and told him that, he needed to take a time in, that, he had just made a mess and the marker had splattered all over the floor. And then I had a moment. And so the two important things about this, my work is yoga and mindfulness. I had a moment of being very reactive, not taking a breath to think about what happened. And when he went and sat on the chair for his time in, I took a moment to think, the reason that he threw the pencils on the ground was because he felt interrupted and disrupted. And so that was an attention-seeking behavior. And certainly he got the attention he was looking for. And he discontinued the conversation that my husband and I were having. And ultimately, that's what he wanted to do. And so we were able to have that conversation, but it was just that reminder that, and especially for my husband, that when he comes in of, hey, saying hi to my son Reef, saying hi to me, letting, if there's a conversation or something going on, that to be heard, and then him acknowledging my son before just like going and talking to me, because that's how he works in his behavior. So that antecedent is that my son needs acknowledgement. If not, he may have a behavior like that. So I hope that makes sense for you all, and you can think of 1,000 ways that can unfold in the classroom. So taking that time to really look at why is the behavior happening versus constantly thinking about a consequence for it. Before I break you out, we're going to do a breakout and an activity with some behavior management. Before we do that, does anybody have any questions about the classroom management that I talked about? Engagement versus disengagement, dynamic teaching, or the umbrella of respect, or the ABC method? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you into your breakout rooms. When you go into your breakout rooms, you are going to have a scenario that I am going to assign you. I want you to read the scenario and then think of like 1 to 3 things, thinking about the classroom management that we talked about, that you could do in order to support that behavior. So I'll break you out. Once you're broken out, I will shoot your room what the behavior is, and then you can respond to it.
Hello.
Hey. Okay, so let's go ahead. You're going to share 2 to 3 things. If you look at the chat bar, it's on the side in terms of the scenarios if you need to look at what your classmates are doing. So the first group was responsible for grades kindergarten. You have 15 students and 1 classroom assistant. You're in the middle of teaching when 1 student raises their hand to go to the bathroom and suddenly 4 more raise their hands and have to go too. How do you respond? Will that group share with me some of the ideas that you had?
Yeah, Key and I pretty much just said we have the assistant in there, so if 4 or 5 students have to go, we just tell them, okay, the assistant will take 1 at a time, and then when they come back, the next person could go if they still have to by that time. That's pretty much what we said, how we would respond to it.
Right. Awesome. Good job. I think the most important thing here, and you'll get to this when you get to anatomy and physiology, is continence is developing in ages 4 to 5. So that's the ability to actually hold your pee. So one of the biggest things that we see with this age group is that they pee their pants and pee all over the mat, and it sucks. So not taking for granted, it's also a natural behavior when one person has to do it, they all have to, but also not taking that for granted. So making sure that you give them the opportunity to go to the restroom. Another thing is like, it's a standard rule before yoga, go to the bathroom, wash your hands is helpful as well. Awesome. Scenario 2, grades 2, ages 7 and 8. During classroom discussion, you have a student who's so eager to contribute to the conversation that she begins to share and go into tangents that are not relevant to the discussion topic. How do you respond? Can you share whichever group was doing this one?
Yeah, we just said like to raise your hand and to keep your discussions relevant to the topic.
Okay. Anything else?
We couldn't really think of anything else.
Okay. So I think the most important thing about this is that, you know, obviously this person wants to be heard. And we talked a lot in the beginning about like empathy and compassion. And so obviously you can't sit there and let the person go on and on and on. But definitely you don't want to shut this person down because that's probably maybe potentially happening elsewhere. And they find this as an opportunity to share. So I think it's important to acknowledge the student. So the way that this could look would be like, oh, hey, Brody, thanks for sharing. That's a really great story. But right now we're talking about our breathing. So let's check in after class. And I want to hear about how your weekend at your grandma's house was. Versus, Brody, that's not what we're talking about right now. That's not relevant. And so moving on, Cade, what did you want to talk about? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Scenario 3, so you're grade 4, your ages 9 and 10, you have 18 students, no classroom assistant. You decide to do partner poses and you assign 2 girls to work together and 1 girl doesn't want to work. What do you do? Who had this one?
Yeah, so that was me and Bill.
Okay, cool. What'd you guys think?
Well, so we were thinking that like would it be easy to just try to like switch them quickly with another group like partner session and you know swap partners quickly since they don't want to work with each other?
Okay. What else? Or was that all that you had?
Since you don't have an assistant, it'd be kind of hard because otherwise we were thinking you could pull them aside and each just do the pose with them.
Yep, that's another
else?
really good option.
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
what
that's really good. I mean, obviously this is like, this also, there's like a lot of other variables that matter with the classroom. I think the most underlying and important thing is like having a discussion before you start partner poses, like this is what we're going to do. This is what partner poses look like. And I want to be really clear that like at some point in our time together, we'll probably all work together. I understand if you need to sit out for a partner pose for personal reasons, you need to let me know that at the start of class. So there's some boundary making there that can be really helpful. Also talking about like beforehand, like, hey, listen, Bill and Mike, I know like our class, I know that some of you might not hang out, you might not really know each other that well, but we do partner work and at some point we're all going to work together. So again, like addressing that, because I think it's a really important thing for us to learn in a life lesson, that like, just because I maybe don't hang out with someone, or frankly, I don't care for someone, doesn't mean that I can't be kind to them or still work with them. Because in the real world, we all know that you have to work with people you don't care for or you wouldn't hang out with. So getting that early on can be helpful. And then in terms of in the moment, I would check, you know, like, okay, so Mike, you don't want to work together, so you can go ahead and do partner rooftop, but you have to do it at the wall. And also making yourself an offering is absolutely a really great thing to say. So like, okay, Bill, you can go ahead and do rooftops at the wall, and hey, Mike, I'll do it with you, stepping in. You could also do like a partner switch as well. If it was less obvious, that would be a great idea as well.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Thanks guys, that was great. The last one that I had was you're teaching grades 5. It's the infamous 10-year-old boy who's in downward dog making farting noises. Travis, sadly, you were in a room by yourself. I also addressed another room with this, but nobody responded. Does anybody have any ideas about this?
Yeah, we just said that since you're by yourself in the class and there's no assistant to help you out, that you should just tell the student that it's not appropriate and that they need to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could definitely go back to your classroom boundaries and check in about that. Like, I think also too, there's just that level of like, I always ask myself with a behavior, like, is it disruptive? Is it harming myself? Is it harming the person doing it? Is it harming any students? Is it harming me? And if you can't say yes to any of that, then continue teaching. And so sometimes with the farting, honestly, if like sometimes students don't start laughing, they don't say anything. They're kind of like, WTF is this person doing? So then I just don't even entertain it or give it energy, because obviously that person wants attention, right? The problem is like when the whole class starts laughing or other people start making the fart noise, then it kind of needs to be addressed, which is like, you know, yeah, like, and that comes into like the authenticity of like, I know that it's really funny to do downward dog and fart. I think it's funny too, but that's not what we're doing right now. As an option. Any other suggestions or thoughts that anyone had?
Another thing you could do is get them into like a pose, like child's pose, where they're all like looking at the ground. They can go up like individually one-on-one and talk to them.
Absolutely. Yep. So, and I love, Dylan, the way that you said put them in child's pose. So, you know, the biggest thing is that like it's totally normal that a 5th grade boy is farting, right? Like it's where they're at developmentally. The last thing you'd want to do is, hey, Dylan, stop making those fart noises. Then it's like real embarrassing. But putting them into child's pose, no one can see, and just walking up and quietly being like, yo, Dylan, no farting today, please. Right? Any other suggestions? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. That was awesome. So what I want to do next is talk about lesson planning. So we kind of got a little bit choppy at the end of class last week. Some of you have been submitting the lesson plans, which have been great. I've been giving a lot of feedback. But I do want to review the lesson plan template. I want to talk quickly about the importance of the theme as well as the objective. I'm going to review with you how to create a sequence, and then talk to you about the idea of the yoga tool belt. So quickly, what I'm going to do is go into a share screen to share this lesson plan template. Okay. 7 components to the lesson plan. You have your time in, which is your breathing exercises. Somebody asked me in an email, how many breathing exercises do you have to have? You can have anywhere from like 1 to 2, I think is a fair range. Then you have your discussion, your warm-up, yoga poses, a game or a partner work, relaxation, and then the class project or homework. When you're creating your lesson plans, make sure that you're using your yoga ed manuals for your content. That's the point of it. Some lesson plans have had made up things, which some of them have been great and some haven't been so great. So please try to use the content in your manual. In terms of the discussion, also remember you want this to be an interactive experience. You want to ask questions and have the students engage. Students are social. When they're engaged, they're more likely to learn and to contribute versus being talked at. I'll talk about the yoga pose sequence in a minute. That's another thing that I caught, is that some of you still need some support with putting together, excuse me, your sequence. One thing that I want to talk about is the theme and the objective or the concept of the class. So for those of you who did the standards-based lesson plan, the way that this worked was that you chose a standard and that standard became your objective. So let's say it's to teach basic locomotor movements. So maybe your theme is going to be like left and right, and you're going to teach different locomotor movements and talk to students about the left and the right side of their body through the locomotor movements. What you want to make sure is that in each one of your components, you somehow address how you're teaching them about locomotor movements, how you're teaching them about the left and the right side of their body. So for example, maybe for time in, I'm going to have them do shaka breathing. And I'm going to say, you're going to breathe in your right side, your left side. So I'm going to teach them like left side, right side. I'm teaching a movement, right? By going side to side here. Then in your discussion, you would say, okay, in today's class, we're going to talk about different ways that you can move your body. On the left side of your body, on the right side of your body, what are ways that you move your body? Running, skipping, you know, having inquiry is really important. And then doing a warm-up activity that moves their body, and then doing the yoga poses. And as you go through each of the components, weaving in that conversation around how this is relevant to your theme, right? So yoga poses, what poses happen on the left side and the right side of the body? You have triangle, you have warrior one, you have tree pose. And then maybe you want to put in a game or a partner pose that works with opposites. And then weave that into your relaxation. So that's one thing that I want to make really clear, is that the place you want to start when you're creating a lesson plan is with your theme and your concept. Once you have your theme and your concept, you need to think about what content can I pull out of the manuals to put together this lesson plan and thread it throughout. Does anyone have any questions about theme, concept, or the 7 components? Okay, great. So next, what I would like to do is I'm just going to go to a new share, and I'm going to share, let me see. Okay, hold on. I'm going to share how to create a lesson plan. Just give me a moment. Okay. So how to sequence the class, this is going to be really important too. Last week I talked to you about it in terms of a wave, like you're starting and then you're building to the apex, like the peak of the wave, the peak of the energy part of your sequence, and then bringing them back down to calming. In this photo, it gives you in the circular way, thinking about like where you start is where you stop, and really taking people through a whole entire like flow like or circular like motion. So it's important that you recognize that you want to start your yoga class with breathing. Then from breathing, you move into your warm-ups. From your warm-ups, you go to your standing poses. From standing, you go to balancing, balancing to back bending to forward bend, to your hip openers, to your twists, to your inversion, to your relaxation, back up to a seat, and complete with a breathing exercise. I'm going to send you all a link to Yoga Ed has a YouTube channel, and we have a lot of mat yoga classes. I think it would be a great idea for you to look at the yoga classes so that you can get an idea of the lesson plan, as well as check out the sequence. Also, to remember, you have all of the lesson plan templates that have tons of sequences. So when you're putting together your lesson plans, you all are new to this. You don't have to write your own new sequence. Lean into the ones that Yoga Ed's already written, and as you get experience and do this more, then you'll get the confidence to write your own. So that's one thing I want you to be really clear of. This is something Dr. Felix and I will really look at in your teaching, is making sure that you have a complete sequenced lesson plan in terms of the way the yoga poses are put together. And it's also just going to be really important for you in terms of enjoyment for your students of having a properly sequenced yoga pose sequence. Also, to please remember, use the poses from your manual. Some lesson plans have been sent to me with yoga poses that I'm unfamiliar with. So please make sure to use the ones that are in your manual. Does anyone have any questions on this review of yoga pose sequence? Okay, awesome. You all are keeping speed with me. That's great. Let me just check my notes and see if I have anything else for you. Oh, the last thing that I want to talk to you about is your yoga tool belt. And so it's really important, and this is why I really want you to start digging into your content, and when you're writing lesson plans using the yoga ed content and getting familiarity with it, is that you need to think of each of the breathing exercises, all of the yoga poses. Really, I think of this like a tool belt, and that yoga ed is giving you a tool belt of breathing exercises, yoga poses, relaxation techniques, etc. And it's your job to A, know how to teach them, and B, know when to teach them. So that at any time, if you might create a really perfect lesson plan that you're like, oh, I'm going to teach my students how to be energized today. And then you go into class and your students are like, oh, we've had a really exhaustive week, you know, Miss Coletta, can we do more restoratives? I need to be able to go into my yoga tool belt and be like, okay, what breathing exercises are more restorative? What yoga poses are more restorative? What's a really great restorative relaxation that I could give to them? So it's this idea of mastery of content and really thinking of that this is a tool belt that you can put on and use. And it'll also be really important because for some of you, maybe you won't teach yoga as an actual unit once you're a PE teacher, but you'll use it to warm up and cool down before you do basketball or for you run your mile on the track. And it's important for you to know, okay, what breathing exercise is what I want to use before or after. And all this information is in your manuals. Also, to make sure to watch the videos. I think those are better than your manuals because you'll see an actual child in the pose going in and out of them. So you actually are able to see it. Also, when you're watching it, do it along with the video. Getting a little bit of that experience in your body will help you find the confidence to teach on your own. Any questions on the yoga tool belt, anything that I just said? Okay. In the meetup, you got an optional homework assignment. I'm going to go ahead and share screen on it so that you can see it. It's putting together a yoga sequence as well as giving a shot of doing a yoga story. So the yoga stories are, can be a fun way, especially with your young students, to deliver content. So putting together a group of stories and doing something like maybe going to the ocean or going to the zoo and exploring different animals. And the way that you deliver the class is like by giving a yoga story. So let me go ahead and share screen really quick on these. Yoga sequence. Okay, the yoga sequence is here. So I gave you, we did a little short rendition of this last week, but I gave you a whole slew of yoga poses. They're not in proper order. Go ahead and put it order. You can print this off and do it, or you can give it to me in a Word doc, however works best for you. That's the first assignment. The second assignment is putting together a yoga story. Remember that on your children's guide, page 5, we talk about how to put together a yoga story. Here are the different poses. First, always, before you write a yoga story, think about the poses you want in your story, put them into order, and then you write your story. because something that I do see happen with yoga stories is that if you decide that you want to write this story and then you put all the poses, they might not be in proper sequence, and then you have a lot of that like standing up, sitting down, and then it can get really chaotic in a yoga story. So make sure that you take these poses, put them in an order, and then write a yoga story. And you can do anything, choose anything, like maybe you want to be at the park or in a arboretum, I don't know, with the different poses that I gave, but you can do a little yoga story. Any questions on the homework assignments for this week? Okay, awesome. So that's all content that to cover all this week. I'm going to take a final attendance, so don't hang up yet. And before we go, does anybody have any questions for me? Okay, awesome. So just stay here for one moment so I can make sure that I get everybody. So I have Travis, and I have Cade, and I have Drew, and I have David, and I have Ethan, and I have Dylan. Bill, Travis, and I have Michael, and I have Bill. Did I lose Cam? I lost Cam. Did I lose Brody? Nope, Brody's here. Did I lose Trevor? Nope, Trevor's here. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. It's great to see you all this week or hear you all. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, Bryn at Yoga Ed, and I'll get your assignments back to you end of day today or early tomorrow morning. Thanks, guys.